His best friend was dying in his arms, bleeding out in a Wyoming blizzard. And with his last breath, Thomas made Caleb promise the impossible. Find a woman you've never met, a woman named Margaret, and marry her. 3,000 miles away, Margaret was working in a factory, her face and hands covered in scars from the fire that nearly killed her. She had saved a young girl's life and lost everything else. She was supposed to marry Thomas, build a new life in Wyoming, escape the nightmare of the mills. But Thomas is dead, and now a stranger is offering to take his place. Caleb swore he would never marry. He watched his parents destroy each other and vowed to never let that happen to him. Now he's standing at the train station, waiting for a scarred woman he's never seen, promising to build a life with someone he doesn't know, all because of a vow made to a dying man. Can duty become devotion? Can two broken strangers choose each other and mean it? The best promises aren't just kept, they're surpassed. What starts as obligation can become the greatest love of your life, if you have the courage to let it. This story reminds us, you don't have to feel ready to start. You just have to be willing to show up day after day and choose to build something real. If you believe that love can grow from the most unexpected places, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Drop a comment. Would you marry a stranger to honor a friend's dying wish? Share this with someone who needs to believe that second chances are real, even when they come wrapped in impossible promises. For 3 days, that storm had been brewing. Caleb knew the signs, but his friend Thomas Brennan was sure they could push the herd just another 20 miles. That sky will hold, Thomas had said, certain as sunrise. We get 'em to winter pasture now, we save a week's work come spring. Caleb felt a coming cold and an old shoulder injury that told him different. But Thomas was the man who'd given him a chance when nobody else would, who taught him how to make a life out on the frontier. So Caleb just nodded and helped push 300 head of cattle toward the high ground. 6 hours later, the world just disappeared. 1 minute it was cold, the next it was a screaming white nightmare. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in 20 minutes. The herd scattered and Caleb lost sight of Thomas in the chaos. He hollered his friend's name till his throat was raw, but the wind just swallowed the sound. He found Thomas's horse first, standing alone by some rocks. Thomas was 20 yards away, his leg bent at an awful angle. A sharp rock had torn right through his thigh when the horse went down, and the snow beneath him was soaked red. "Caleb," Thomas whispered. "Figured you might miss me in all this." Caleb knelt down, his hands going right to the wound. It was deep, ragged, and bleeding way too fast. "We gotta get you warm," Caleb said. But they both knew the truth. They were miles from any shelter, and Thomas had lost too much blood. "Don't," Thomas said, grabbing Caleb's wrist. "Don't waste your breath. We both know how this story ends. There's something I got to tell you." "There's a woman," Thomas said, each word a struggle. "Margaret Hale, back in Pennsylvania. We've been writing for 2 years. I promised her a life out here. Promised I'd send for her in the spring." His eyes were locked on Caleb's. "I was going to marry her." The words hit Caleb like a punch. "Thomas, I need you to promise me something. Find her. Marry her. Don't let her come all this way to find nothing but a headstone." Caleb shook his head. "You know I don't hold with marriage." He was thinking of his own folks and how their bitterness had poisoned everything. "I know," Thomas coughed, "but she's got no one. Been working in a mill, saving every dime for this chance I promised her. Don't let me die and take that from her, too." The wind howled around them, not caring one bit about dying wishes. Caleb thought of all the times Thomas had stood by him, never asking for a single thing in return. Until now. "Promise me, Caleb." Thomas's voice was fading. "Your word has always been good as gold. Don't break it now." Caleb looked at his friend, at the life leaving his eyes. He thought about that woman back east, her dreams turning to dust in a Wyoming blizzard. I give you my word, Caleb said, the promise heavy in the frozen air. I'll find her. I'll marry her. A look of peace crossed Thomas's face. Her letters in my saddlebag. Tell her. Tell her I'm sorry. And Caleb, his voice was just a whisper. Don't just do it 'cause you have to. She deserves more. See her for who she is. And then he was gone. Caleb sat there for a long time, the snow piling up on his shoulders. He'd just promised to marry a stranger, a vow that went against everything he believed. Finally, the cold forced him to move. He couldn't carry Thomas, so he marked the spot with his friend's hat and some stones, a promise to come back. He found Thomas's horse, took the saddlebag with the letters, and pointed his own horse south toward a line camp 5 miles away. The ride was a frozen hell. He passed out twice, but his horse just kept plodding on. His mind played tricks on him, mixing up memories with the sound of Thomas's voice, reminding him of the promise he now had to keep, no matter the cost. He found the line camp more by dumb luck than anything else. His horse, bless its heart, just walked right up to the little cabin like it knew the way home. Caleb tumbled out of the saddle into a deep snowdrift and dragged himself to the door. He barely got it open before the world went black. When he came to, he was filled with 2 things: warmth and a whole mess of pain. The warmth was from a fire somebody had built in the stove. The pain was every frozen piece of him screaming as it thawed out. He was laid out on the floor, wrapped in blankets, feeling 1,000 needles in his hands and feet. A rough voice cut through the haze. Easy there, son. You got yourself a bad case of frostbite. Lost 3 fingers and both your big toes. Could have been a lot worse. Caleb turned his head and saw Jake Wilson feeding logs into the fire. Jake was a quiet fella in his 50s who'd been working this ranch forever. Thomas, Caleb rasped. Jake's face told the story before he said a word. Saw where it happened once the storm broke. We brought him down to town for a proper burial. I'm sorry, Caleb. I know y'all were thick as thieves. Yesterday. Caleb's mind was slow like molasses in winter. How long I been here? 3 days, Jake said. Found you the morning after the storm. You were more ice than man. Didn't think you were going to make it. 3 whole days. Thomas was gone. And a promise Caleb made was just sitting there, waiting. I gotta get to town, he said, trying to push himself up. A sharp pain shot through his feet, and Jake gently pushed him back down. You ain't going nowhere till those toes heal up some. That business in town can wait. But it couldn't wait. He thought about the letters in Thomas's saddlebag. About a woman clear out in Pennsylvania waiting on a man who was never coming home. That promise felt like a boulder on his chest. Jake, Caleb asked, can you do something for me? In Thomas's bag. There's some letters. I need to read 'em. Jake didn't ask why. He just brought the bag over. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were about 24 letters addressed to Thomas. Caleb picked up the newest one and started to read. It said, Dear Thomas, your last letter got here 3 weeks back. I've read it so many times the paper's getting soft. You talk about Wyoming like it's the promised land. I try to picture it, but all I've ever known is this city. The frontier feels 1,000,000 miles away, but I think about it. I think about all that open sky you talk about and building something that's my own. The mill takes 12 hours of my day and barely gives me enough to get by. There's no future for me here. You ask if I'm sure about coming out west to marry a man I only know from his words on a page. Well, the only thing I'm sure about is that staying here is a slow death. Your letters, they give me hope. Not just for a husband, but for a life that's mine. I've saved nearly enough for the train ticket. I should have the rest by spring. I know you offered to send the money, but I need to do this myself. That way, if it turns out we don't suit each other, I'm not trapped. I'm not a girl full of romantic notions, Thomas. I just think we could build something decent together, based on respect. If you're willing to take on a practical woman with more grit than good looks, then I'm willing to come see what we can make of this. Yours in hope, Margaret Hale. Caleb read it again, then started on the others. He spent the next few hours piecing together their story. He saw two honest people building trust across 1,000 miles. They didn't use fancy words. Thomas wrote about his dream for the ranch. Margaret wrote about her life at the mill, about watching her own father waste away from the dust in his lungs. She mentioned a fire in some of her first letters, but never went into detail. It was always just since the fire or before the scars. Then Caleb found a letter that laid it all bare. You asked about the fire, so I'll just tell you straight. It was an accident at the mill a couple years ago. I stayed behind to help a girl who was trapped. We both got out, but I got burned pretty bad on my face and neck. They don't look good. I'm not telling you this for pity. I'm telling you because you have a right to know what you're getting. I won't be a pretty bride when I step off that train. Thomas's answer was just as plain. Margaret, I don't give a damn about scars. I care about a woman who's got the courage to help somebody in need. If you're still willing to come, my offer is still good. I need a partner, not a prize to look at. Caleb put the letters down. He was starting to understand this woman, honest, brave, and not looking for a handout. She wanted a partnership. Could he give her that? Could he keep his promise to his friend without living a lie? Must be some powerful letters, Jake said from by the fire. You've been at it for hours. They're from the woman Thomas was going to marry, Caleb said. Jake was quiet for a second. Does she know about him yet? No, Caleb said, looking at his bandaged hands. I've got to write her as soon as I can hold a pen right. What are you fixing to tell her? Jake asked. And that was the question, wasn't it? He thought about Thomas's last words about that promise made in the snow. And he thought about Margaret, a woman who deserved a chance at the life she'd been hoping for. Well, the truth is, Thomas is gone, Caleb finally told Jake. Before he passed, he made me swear I would honor his promise to her. If she still wants to come out here, I will marry her, just like I said. Jake just raised his eyebrows. Son, that is a mighty big promise to make. I gave Thomas my word. Your word is not going to keep a bed warm on a cold night. Caleb turned and looked his friend square in the eye. From her letters, she is not looking for warmth. She is looking for a partner she can respect. And I can give her that. Can you, though? Jake was not being ugly, just asking a plain question. Everybody knows you swore off marrying years ago. Thomas asked me to do this as he was dying, Caleb said flatly. That is what changed. It was a whole week before Caleb could even stand without pain shooting through him or hold a pen steady. He passed the time reading Margaret's letters over and over, trying to get the measure of the woman he was fixing to marry. She wrote about books and politics, but mostly about the hard life at the mill. She was smart and tough, too. Reminded him a bit of Thomas. When he could finally write, he sat down to try and find the right words. Miss Hale, I am writing to tell you that Thomas Brennan passed away 3 weeks ago. He was caught in a blizzard. He asked me to send you this letter, and he asked me to tell you he was sorry he could not keep his promise. Caleb stopped, the words feeling small and useless. How do you tell a woman her whole future just died in the snow? And how do you follow that up by offering to take a dead man's place? My name is Caleb Rowan. Thomas and I worked together for 15 years. He was my best friend. He made me promise that I would find you and offer you the life he wanted for you. A life here in Wyoming, away from the mills, and a marriage built on partnership, not romance. I know this sounds crazy. A stranger offering to make good on a dead man's promise. You do not know me from Adam, and you have no reason to trust me. But I am making the offer because Thomas asked me to, and I keep my promises. If you still want to come west, I will marry you. I will give you a home and my respect. I cannot offer you passion. I do not believe in it. And your letters make me think you do not either. But I will be honest with you. I will never lay a hand on you, and I will always treat you as my equal. If you decide not to come, I will surely understand. A promise to a dead man does not bind you. But if you want a new life, the offer is on the table. I have sent money for the train. You can write to me at this address. Whatever you decide, I wish you well. Caleb Rowan. He read it over, changed a word or two, then sealed it. He put in all the money he had saved, enough for the train ticket and then some. He gave it to Jake to mail. "You are really going through with this," Jake said, holding the heavy envelope. "I gave my word. And what if she comes? What if she gets on that train expecting a husband?" Caleb thought of Thomas, and the promise made in a snowstorm. He thought of a woman brave enough to write about her scars. "Then I will keep my promise," he said. "We will figure out the rest as we go." Caleb went back to work, favoring his healing feet. He threw himself into the hard labor of the ranch, trying not to think about the letter traveling east. Winter got deeper. They lost about 30 head of cattle, but most of the herd made it. He worked right through Christmas and New Year's, his mind on a woman reading his words. Her answer arrived in late January. The mail coach brought it on a snowy day. The postmaster gave Caleb a curious look. "Pennsylvania," he said. "Do not think you have ever gotten mail from back there." Caleb just took the letter and went outside into the quiet snow. He opened it with hands that were not quite steady. "Mr. Rowan, I have thought about your offer. At first I was going to say no. Marrying a stranger for a dead man's promise sounds like a dime novel story. But Thomas was real, and so was his promise. And this hard life I want to escape is real too. So I will accept, but I have my own terms. First, I will pay my own way. I have saved enough, and I will not start our life in your debt. Second, I expect honesty. I do not need romance, but I do require respect. I will be your partner, not a burden you took on. Third, I am not a helpless woman. I can sew, teach, and handle basic doctrine, and I plan to use those skills. If you want a wife who will just stay in the kitchen, tell me now so I do not come. If you agree to these terms, I will be in Wyoming on March 15th. I am trusting your word with my entire future. Margaret Hale. Caleb read the letter twice there in the fallen snow. Her terms were fair and smart, meant to protect herself. She was coming ready to leave if she had to, expecting a true partnership. He could give her that. He could be honest and respectful. He could treat her as an equal. He did not know if it could ever be more than that, but he had given his word to Thomas, and now to her. He would keep his promise and hope for the best. March 15th. That gave him 6 weeks to get ready for a wife he had never even seen. 6 weeks to change his quiet life into one built for two. Caleb folded her letter and put it in his coat pocket close to his heart. Then he looked up at the snow and started planning. He walked back to the ranch, chewing on how a single promise could redirect a man's entire life. Caleb wondered if he had just made the worst mistake he would ever make, or the first right choice in a long time. Miles and miles away, a woman with more grit than good looks was getting ready to head west. She was putting all her faith in a stranger who swore he would give her the future a dead man could not. Those 6 weeks felt like an eternity and no time at all. Caleb was stuck between the life he knew and whatever was barreling down the tracks toward him. The ranch chores were the same as always. He fed the herd, mended fences busted by winter storms, and broke the ice in the water troughs each morning. But a hum of worry was always there, just under the surface. He had never shared his home with a woman. Not ever. His small cabin was built for one man and had no comforts to speak of. He spent his nights trying to make it look better, though he had no earthly idea what that meant. Jake, his friend, dropped by one evening. He watched Caleb move the furniture around for the 3rd time that week. "You are going to wear a rut in those floorboards with all your pacing," Jake said. "When is she supposed to get here again?" Caleb just grunted. "Saturday." Caleb shoved the table toward the window, then dragged it right back. "What if she hates this little cabin? What if she needs something I do not have?" "Then she will tell you, and you will build it," Jake said, settling into the good chair with his pipe. "Stop borrowing trouble from tomorrow." "You want my advice?" Jake asked. "Not really," Caleb mumbled. "Well, you are getting it anyway. Her arriving is not a problem you have to solve. It is just two people figuring out how to make a life. You cannot plan for everything, so just stop trying." Caleb knew his friend was right, but knowing it and feeling it were two different things. He thought about Margaret's letters. He could tell she was smart and tough, and he worried his simple cabin and even simpler life would be a disappointment. She was leaving her whole world behind, traveling 3,000 miles to marry a man she had never met. All she had were his letters and a promise made by her dead fiancé. The weight of that trust felt heavier than a whole winter's snow. On March the 14th, Caleb rode to town to meet the stage. Everyone knew everyone's business, which meant the whole town knew a mail-order bride was coming to marry the quiet ranch foreman who had never looked twice at a woman before. Caleb could feel their eyes on him as he tied up his horse. He stepped inside the general store to get a few things, and the chatter inside dropped to a whisper. "Heard today is the day," Mrs. Peterson, the owner's wife, said, appearing at his elbow. She was fishing for gossip. "Bet you are excited to be getting married after all this time." "Yes, ma'am," Caleb said, giving her nothing but a flat answer. "What is she like, your intended?" "I will know more once I have met her." Mrs. Peterson's eyebrows shot up at that, but her husband called for her before she could ask another question. Caleb paid and got out of there fast. The stage was not due until the afternoon, but he could not make himself leave the depot. He just sat on the bench, watching the road and wondering what Margaret looked like. Her letters mentioned scars, but nothing else. Would he even know who she was? Folks found all sorts of reasons to wander past the depot that morning. Some gave him a nod. Others just peeked from the corners of their eyes. He understood. In a town this small, a new face was a big event. A scarred bride coming to marry a man who had sworn off marriage? That was a spectacle. The stage finally rolled in around 3 o'clock, kicking up a cloud of dust. Caleb stood up, his heart pounding like a drum, which just made him mad at himself. He was 35 years old, too old for nerves, but his palms were sweating in his gloves. The driver opened the door. A salesman got out, then an older lady who was met by her family. Then the third passenger stepped down. Caleb knew it was her, plain and simple. It was in the way she moved, careful but sure, taking in everything with a sharp gaze. She stood tall and straight, not showing a bit of how tired she must have been. She was taller than he had figured, with dark hair pulled back tight from her face. Her gray wool dress was worn but clean, and the scars were just like she wrote. They ran down the right side of her face and neck, pulling the corner of her mouth just a little. She saw him looking, and met his eyes head-on. Her gaze was dark and steady, giving nothing away. Caleb walked toward her. "Miss Hale?" "Mr. Rowan," she said. It was not a question. She looked him up and down for a long moment. He felt like a horse being sized up at auction. "You look like a man who keeps his promises." "I try to," he said. He nodded at her bags. "Are these all you have?" "Everything I own in the world," she said with no hint of sadness. "Just 2 small trunks and a bag. A whole life packed into what she could carry." They stood there in an awkward silence as the stage pulled away. Caleb could feel the whole town watching from behind their curtains. Margaret saw it too. She glanced around, then looked back at him with a flicker of what might have been humor. "It seems I am the afternoon's entertainment." "It is a small town." "Well then," she said, picking up her bag. "Let us give them something to talk about." She faced him squarely. "I traveled 3,000 miles on the strength of a promise. I am tired and I am hungry. So tell me straight, did you mean what you wrote? Or are you hoping I will just turn around and go back?" Her bluntness surprised him, but he was grateful for it. No games, just a woman who needed a straight answer. "I am still willing," he said, his voice steady. "I keep my word." "Good," she nodded once. "Then let us find a place to talk before we make this official. I have my own questions for you." Caleb picked up her trunks, which were heavier than they looked. "There is a restaurant just down the street. We can get you some food there." "Perfect." They walked together, him with the trunks and her with her bag. He could feel every eye in town on them, and he could already hear the gossip that would be served with supper that night. Margaret paid it no mind. The restaurant was quiet. Caleb led her to a table in the back corner. She sat down and took off her hat. The scars went up past her hairline. "You are staring," she said, not unkindly. Sorry, you wrote about them, but seeing them is different. Most people look away, she said. At least you are honest. She folded her hands on the table. Let us be direct with each other, Mr. Rowan. We are strangers fixing to get hitched. We ought to at least know what we are signing up for. The owner's daughter, a young woman named Sarah, came to take their order. She had been a couple of grades behind Caleb in school. She tried her best not to stare at Margaret's scars, but her eyes kept drifting back. Stew for both of us, Caleb said. And coffee. Whatever pie you got today. After Sarah walked away, Margaret leaned in. I will go first, she said. What did Thomas tell you about me? Nothing, Caleb admitted. I did not even know about you until after he was gone. He paused for a moment. I read the letters you sent him. I hope you do not mind. I had to know who I was writing to. I would have done the same thing, Margaret said with a slow nod. So you know about the fire and why I had to leave? Yes. And you still made the offer. Why? It was a straight question that deserved a straight answer. Because I promised Thomas I would, Caleb said, and because your letters sounded like they were from a woman I could respect. Scars do not matter in a partnership. Partnership, Margaret said the word slowly as if testing its feel. That is what you offered. What does that word mean to you? Sarah brought their coffee before he could answer. Caleb wrapped his hands around the warm mug, thinking hard on how to explain it. It means I will not expect you to be instead of who you are supposed to be. You have real skills. You mentioned sewing and teaching and even medicine. I am not about to stop you from using them. That just means you get a say in the big decisions that affect both of us. It means I will listen to what you have to say with respect, even when my own mind is set different. And I expect you to do the same for me. All I am asking for is honesty and a partner in building a life, even if it is not the life either one of us pictured. Margaret took a sip of her coffee, watching him over the top of her cup. And what about the other parts of a marriage? The parts in the bedroom? Her directness caught him off guard, but he met it head on. I will not force you into anything you are not ready for. If we ever get to that place, it will be a choice we both make, together. Good. She put her cup down. I have been on my own for a long, long time, Mr. Rowan. I learned how to fend for myself, to never count on anyone for what I can do with my own two hands. I am not looking for a man to save me. I am looking for a man who will stand beside me while we build something new. That suits me just fine. I have been alone even longer. Their food came and they ate without a word for a while. Caleb watched the way she ate, with no wasted motion, cleaning her plate like a woman who had known true hunger. When she reached for her pie, he saw the scars on her hands. Old burn marks crisscrossed her palms and fingers. You got those saving somebody, he said, thinking back to the letter. The girl down at the mill. Margaret looked down at her hands like she was seeing the scars for the very first time. Her name was Annie. She was only 15. The foreman put her right next to some machinery that was not safe. But that girl needed the money, so she never said a word. When the fire broke out, she was stuck. Her skirt was all tangled up in the gears. Did she make it? Yes. She married a shopkeeper's boy last year, and they moved out to Philadelphia. She still writes to me now and then. A little bit of softness came into Margaret's face. She always says I saved her life, but all I did was what any decent person should have done. But you were the one who did it. Somebody had to. She finished her pie and pushed the plate aside. Is there a preacher in this town? I would like to get this marriage over with today, if that is all right. I am too tired to wait and too practical to see any point in it. Caleb felt a strange feeling in his chest, something between worry and excitement. Are you sure? We could wait a couple of days, let you get some rest. I am sure. I did not travel 3,000 miles just to second-guess myself at the finish line. Margaret's dark eyes locked with his. Unless you are the one having second thoughts. No second thoughts. Just want to make sure you have a way out if you need it. I do not need it. She stood up, brushing crumbs from her skirt. I am 28 years old, Mr. Rowan. I have worked in mills since I was 14. I have lived through fires and watched good people get chewed up by hard times. I know what I want. And if you are offering a real partnership, then I am ready to be your wife. Caleb stood up too, leaving some money on the table to cover their meal. The preacher has a place above the church. We can head over there right now if you want. I want. They walked back through town, but this time their steps had purpose. The sun was getting low, stretching long shadows across the dusty street. A few folks called out to Caleb, their eyes full of curiosity about the woman beside him. The church was a plain wooden building on the edge of town. The white paint was peeling a bit, but it was a solid place. Reverend Martin lived in a small apartment built onto the back. Caleb knocked on his private door instead of going through the main entrance. Reverend Martin answered, looking a little surprised. He was a skinny man in his 60s with kind eyes. Caleb, I surely was not expecting you. His eyes moved to Margaret, taking in her dusty travel clothes and the scars on her face without so much as a blink. And you must be Miss Hale. Welcome to Wyoming. Thank you, Reverend. We came to get married, if you have the time. Margaret's voice was polite, but it was all business. The Reverend blinked. Right now. Do you not want some time to settle in? Get to know one another? We have been writing back and forth for a while now, Caleb said, which was mostly true. And we both just want to get the formalities taken care of, the Reverend. The Reverend looked them over for a long spell, and Caleb felt like the man could see right through him. He figured the Reverend knew this was a strange setup and was just deciding if he ought to ask on it. All right, Reverend Martin finally said. Let me fetch my coat. He told them church law needed 2 witnesses, so Caleb stepped outside. He was about to fetch Jake from the saloon, but saw the Petersons closing up their store. 10 minutes later, they were all standing in the church. Mrs. Peterson was just itching to ask a million questions, but her husband kept shushing her. The late sun poured through the windows, making everything gold. Margaret stood next to Caleb, straight and calm in her gray dress. She wasn't showing a bit of nervousness, and Caleb borrowed some of her grit to steady his own hands. Marriage is a serious thing, the Reverend started, his voice deep and formal. It ain't to be entered into lightly. The Reverend looked from one to the other, and Caleb wondered if he saw them for what they were. 2 strangers tied together by a promise to a dead man. Caleb Rowan, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? The vows rolled on, about for better or worse, richer or poorer. I do. The words came out easier than he reckoned they would. Margaret Hale, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? She answered right away. I do. Do you have rings? The Reverend asked. Caleb shook his head, but Margaret pulled a simple gold band from her pocket. Thomas sent this, she said softly. It was his mother's. Caleb's throat went tight. Thomas had never said a word about sending a ring. He took it and slid it onto her finger. A perfect fit. By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Martin said with a kind smile. You may kiss the bride. Caleb hesitated. They'd agreed to a partnership, not a romance. But Margaret stepped closer and tilted her face up to his, giving him the choice. He leaned down and gave her a brief kiss, more of an agreement than a passion. Congratulations, Mrs. Peterson chirped, about to burst. They signed the marriage book, Caleb Rowan and Margaret Hale Rowan, one name after the other. Some advice, the Reverend said, blotting the ink. A marriage between strangers is a hard road. Y'all will need patience. Don't let pride keep you from speaking plain, and don't let fear keep you from listening. Thank you, Reverend, Margaret said. We'll remember that. Outside, Caleb loaded her trunks onto his horse, which had been waiting patiently for hours. The sky here, she said. It just goes on forever. He helped her up behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist. It was the closest they'd ever been. The ride to the ranch took a good 40 minutes. By the time they arrived, the sun was long gone. Caleb's cabin was dark. He helped her down and lit a lamp inside. The warm light showed the single room that was now their home. A bed, a stove, a table with 2 chairs, and some shelves. It was clean but sparse. "I know it ain't much," Caleb said, suddenly seeing how poor it looked. "I can build on." Margaret walked around the small room, touching a book on the shelf, looking at the stove. She finally turned to him. "It's fine," she said. "It's better than sharing a room with 6 other women." She set her bag on the table. "As for sleeping?" "I'll take the floor," Caleb said quickly. "You take the bed. I've slept on worse." She looked at him for a moment as if sizing him up. "That's not practical long-term," she said. "But for tonight, you look worn out." When she nodded, Caleb stepped outside to give her some privacy. The night was cold and clear, with a sky full of stars. He thought of Thomas, the friend who should have been here, and the promise that brought this woman 3,000 miles across the country. When he came back in, Margaret was in her nightdress, and her dark hair was down. It fell nearly to her waist, longer and thicker than he could have guessed. The scars on her neck were more visible, but somehow she looked less guarded. "Thank you," she said, "for keeping your promise." "A man's supposed to keep his word," he answered. "That's just decency." "You might be surprised how rare that is," she replied, climbing into the bed. "Good night, Mr. Rowan." "Caleb," he said. "If we're married, you ought to call me Caleb." "Then good night, Caleb. And you should call me Margaret." "Good night, Margaret." Caleb laid his bedroll by the stove. He stayed awake for a long time after her breathing became slow and steady. This morning he was a bachelor. Tonight he was a husband to a woman he barely knew. He had honored his friend's last wish, and he reckoned that was something. In the quiet dark, the only sound was her breathing and the wind outside. He finally closed his eyes, knowing the real work would start tomorrow. Learning to live with the stranger, who was now his wife. Morning came cold, with frost on the windows. Caleb woke up stiff and sore from the hard floor. He saw Margaret already up, standing by the stove, trying to get a fire going from the dead embers. "Kindling's in the box by the door," he said, pushing himself up. In the thin morning light, the scars on her face looked sharp and clear. "I didn't mean to wake you," she said, startled. "This stove is a stubborn one. The kindling to get the best airflow. The coffee is in that tin on the second shelf. Water is in the bucket, but we will need to fetch some fresh from the well. I can get it. Let me show you where everything is first. No sense in you wandering around lost." They went through the morning chores together like 2 polite strangers. Caleb showed her the well, the shed where they stored supplies, and the little garden patch that would need planting come springtime. Margaret just listened and asked practical questions, taking it all in. When they finally sat down for breakfast with coffee and old biscuits, the silence between them felt heavy. "I ought to explain how my days go," Caleb finally said. "I work over at the Broken Creek Ranch 6 days a week. I'm gone before the sun comes up and I'm back around dark. Sundays are mine to handle things around here." Margaret nodded, holding her coffee cup. "What is it you do at the ranch?" "I am the foreman. I manage the cowboys and the cattle. The owner trusts me to run the place. And the pay? It is enough. We will not be fancy, but we will not go hungry." He waited a second, then added, "You said in your letters you wanted to use your skills. There might be some chances in town. The school teacher is getting on in years, and Mrs. Henderson, who does the sewing, has arthritis, something awful in her hands. I will look into it." Margaret put down her cup and looked him square in the eye. "I need to be straight with you about something. I have $43 saved. It is not much, but it is mine, and I'm keeping it separate. If this arrangement does not work out, I need to know I have a way to leave." Her words stung him a little more than he expected, but he kept his face calm. "That is fair. I told you I would not trap you here. I am not saying I plan on leaving. I am just saying I need to have the choice." Her voice was steady. "I have seen too many women get stuck in bad situations because they did not have a dollar to their name." "I understand. And I meant what I said yesterday. You are free to work and keep your own money." A little bit of the tension left her shoulders. Thank you. I know most men do not think about marriage that way. Well, I reckon I am not most men. Caleb stood and gathered their cups. I need to get over to the ranch. Will you be all right here by yourself? I have been managing on my own for 14 years. I think I can handle it. But there was something else in her voice, maybe a touch of loneliness. Although, if you could just point me toward the closest neighbor, just in case. Jake Wilson's place is about half a mile south. You can see his light at night. He is a good man if you get in a bind. Caleb put on his coat and hat. There is some venison and potatoes inside. Help yourself to whatever you need. Margaret walked him to the door. In the morning light, her dark eyes seemed almost black. Caleb, thank you for not making this any harder than it needs to be. Some men would be bothered by a wife with her own money. Some men are fools. He put his hat on and stepped out into the cold. I will see you around sundown. The ride to the Broken Creek Ranch took him about 20 minutes. The land was just starting to wake up from winter. You could still see patches of snow in the shady spots, but the worst of the cold was gone. He let his horse find its own way while he thought about how strange his life had just become. He was going to work just like any other day, but now he was coming home to a wife instead of an empty cabin. The ranch was already busy when he got there. Cowboys were moving back and forth, getting ready for the day. Smoke was coming from the main house where the owner, Samuel Garrett, lived. Everything looked the same as yesterday, but to Caleb it all felt different. Jake met him before he even got to the barn. Well, I will be. You actually went and did it. Got hitched yesterday. News sure travels fast in this town. Mrs. Peterson was holding court at the saloon last night, telling everybody about the wedding and the scarred bride who got off the stagecoach. Jake's face was hard to read. She has got the whole town buzzing. Caleb felt a slow burn of anger start deep in his gut. People are just curious, is all. People should learn to mind their own business. That ain't how it works in a small town. And you know it, Jake said, falling into step with Caleb. So, how is she, your new wife? She's practical, Caleb said, checking a fence post. Strong, not looking for anybody to save her. She wants to work. I told her about the open teacher spot and how Mrs. Henderson needs help with her sewing. A good woman needs a purpose, Jake agreed, watching him. You doing all right with all this? It's a big change. I gave my word, Caleb said simply. I'll make it right. They spent the day mending fences and checking on cattle. It was hard work that kept a man's mind busy, but in the quiet stretches, Caleb's thoughts kept drifting back to the cabin. He wondered what Margaret was doing, and if she was already regretting her choice. When he rode in that evening, a warm light was glowing in the window. He could see her shape moving around inside. He'd been alone for so long, the sight of a light and a person waiting at home tightened his chest. It felt strange, but it also felt right. Inside the cabin already felt different. It felt like a home. The cabin felt different, more like a home. A cloth lay on the table, and his books were dusted and neat. Margaret was at the stove, stirring a pot that smelled a whole lot better than his own cooking. She wore a simple blue dress, sleeves rolled up. You did not have to go and do all this, Caleb said, hanging his hat. I cannot stand to be idle, she answered without turning. Supper is about ready. There is hot water if you want to wash. They ate her venison stew, which was seasoned just right. The talk was quiet but easy enough. She had taken stock of the place and walked the property line. I met your neighbor, Jake, she said, dipping bread in her bowl. Figured he ought to know who I was. What did you make of him? Caleb asked. He seems like a good man, was polite. He told me about Thomas, about you two being close. Caleb froze, his spoon halfway to his mouth. What exactly did he tell you? That Thomas saved your life in a bad bar fight, and you were friends after that? Her eyes stayed on his. He said Thomas was a fine man who should not have died in a blizzard. No, he should not have, Caleb said, his appetite gone. If I would have made us wait out that storm, he would be here, and you would be marrying him, not me. Stop that, Margaret said, her voice sharp. Do not you put that on yourself. Storms happen. It was not your fault. I made him a promise, Caleb said quietly. Grieving is one thing. carrying blame is another. She reached over and touched his hand for a moment. Thomas made his own choice. You are keeping your promise to him. That is what matters. The rest of the meal was silent, but it was a comfortable quiet. Afterwards, she shooed him out to do his chores while she cleaned. When he returned, she was mending one of his torn shirts. Are all these yours? I never seem to find the time. Well, I will, she said. I am good with a needle. Her stitches were tiny and perfect. I have been thinking, she said, about the school and the sewing. I would like to go into town tomorrow. Let folks know I am looking for work. I can take you on my way to the ranch, he offered. Thank you. She tied off a knot. I need to start earning my keep. You do not have to do that. Yes, she said, looking right at him. I do. Not for you, but for me. I have to know I can stand on my own 2 feet. Caleb understood that feeling down to his bones. He had built his own life where he answered to no one. The next morning, he drove her into town. She wore her best dress, simple but clean, with her hair pinned up tight. He knew it would not stop the stares. In a town this size, there were no secrets. Miss Sarah Pritchard was a small woman in her 60s, with a sharp mind but a tired body. You must be Mrs. Rowan, she said as they came in. The town has been buzzing. I imagine so, Margaret replied evenly. Caleb said you might need help at the school. I need a replacement, Miss Pritchard stated plainly. I should have retired 5 years ago. I am not formally trained, Margaret said, but I am educated. I can teach the basics. At the mill, I taught girls to read their own work contracts. Miss Pritchard looked impressed. That is useful learning. But can you handle the older boys? I managed a floor of 40 women in a loud mill, Margaret said. I reckon I can manage a few schoolboys. A small smile appeared on the teacher's face. I believe you can. When can you begin? Whenever you need me. They settled on a small salary. It was not much, but it was a start. And more importantly, it was a real job that would give her a place in this town. Next, they went to Mrs. Henderson's cottage. The woman's hands were knotted from hard work and pain. Her eyes flickered to Margaret's scars, but she smiled kindly. Mrs. Rowan, what can I do for you? I was told you are the town's seamstress, Margaret said. I am skilled with a needle and wondered if you needed a hand. Hope bloomed on Mrs. Henderson's face. Oh, please come inside. Her home was buried in unfinished work. Piles of fabric and half-done projects were everywhere. I used to finish 3 dresses a week, she said, her voice shaking with frustration. Now, with this arthritis, I am lucky to finish 1. The work just keeps piling up. Margaret looked at the pieces of a wedding gown. Your stitch work is beautiful. It was, Mrs. Henderson sighed. Now it just takes so long. I was about to tell folks I could not do it anymore. Instead of taking all the business for yourself, Margaret's plan was simple. You handle the design and cutting, the parts that take a skilled hand. I can do the sewing and finishing work. They would split the money based on who did what. Mrs. Henderson looked Margaret up and down. You would do that? Settle for half when you could take everything? Margaret nodded. You have a good name in this town. People trust you. That is worth a whole lot, and I respect it. I am the newcomer here. Working with you helps me earn that same trust, and it lets you keep doing the work you love. You are a strange one, Mrs. Rowan. So I hear. They decided to give it a try, starting with a wedding dress due in 3 weeks. Mrs. Henderson would manage the design, and Margaret would sew. The pay would be split 60-40, with the larger share going to Mrs. Henderson since her reputation brought in the customers. It was nearly noon by the time they left. As they walked to Caleb's horse, he noticed the townsfolk watching them. Some were bold with their stares. Others tried to be sly about it. Margaret saw them too, but paid them no mind. Well, that went smoother than I figured, she said. I thought I would have to argue my case a lot harder. You are offering something they need, Caleb told her. That makes you important, no matter what you look like. He paused a moment. Though I reckon women like Miss Pritchard and Mrs. Henderson see past the scars quicker than most. They are practical, and practical folks do not have time for nonsense or judging a book by its cover. Margaret gave him a sideways glance. You best get to your work. I can find my way back to the cabin just fine. It is a 4-mile walk. I have 2 good legs and I know how to use them. Caleb knew that tone. It was Margaret making it plain that she was nobody's burden. All right then. But take some water and watch your step at the stream. The snow melt has it running high. I will be careful. He watched her walk off, back straight and full of purpose, before getting on his horse and riding toward the ranch. About an hour later, Jake found him checking fence posts. Heard your wife already found herself work, Jake said, getting straight to the point. Teaching and sewing, the whole town is buzzing about it. She's not the type to sit still. No, I suppose she is not, Jake said, hammering a post firm. Mrs. Peterson was in the store this morning telling everyone who would listen how sharp your Mrs. Rowan is. Said the scars just fade away when you see how she carries herself. A hot flash of anger went through Caleb. The scars should not matter one bit. In a perfect world, maybe they would not. But this is not that world, Caleb. Your wife is going to get stares and whispers, and maybe worse. The real question is, can she take it? She worked in a factory with burns all over her face and hands. I think she can handle a little small-town talk. Likely so, Jake said, moving on to the next fence post. So, are you doing all right with this whole arrangement? This is not the life you had planned. Caleb mulled that over while he worked. Was he all right? He had figured he would hate having his quiet life turned upside down. Instead, he found himself wondering about Margaret. He wanted to know what she thought about his books, what she saw in the big, wide-open land, and if this life they were building could ever be more than just a deal they had made. I am getting by, he said at last. Better than I thought I would, to be honest. Well, that is something. Life fell into a steady rhythm. Caleb would head out for ranch work at dawn. Margaret spent mornings at the schoolhouse and afternoons sewing for Mrs. Henderson. They ate supper together, their talks growing easier as they learned how the other thought and felt. Margaret proved her worth right away. Soon, parents were asking for her by name to help their children with reading. Mrs. Henderson told anyone who would listen that Margaret's stitching was finer than her own had ever been. The wedding dress they made together was so perfect it brought in 2 more orders right away. Caleb was in awe watching his wife make her place in the community. She did not try to charm anyone or put on a friendly act. She just worked hard, did what she promised, and treated everyone with plain-spoken respect. Some folks never got comfortable with her scars, but most forgot all about them once they saw how capable she was. One evening, about 6 weeks into their marriage, Caleb came home and found Margaret at the table figuring numbers on a piece of paper. She looked up and he saw a fire of accomplishment in her eyes. I have earned enough to help with the house, she announced. $23 from my work. I want to give you half for food and supplies. Margaret, you do not have to do that. We agreed this would be a partnership. Partners pull their own weight when they can. She pushed the money toward him. Please, take it. Caleb took the money. He understood this was about more than dollars and cents. It was about her independence. Thank you. I will put it with the household money. Good, she said, gathering her papers. I have been thinking about something else, too. This cabin is small. You have been sleeping on the floor for 6 weeks, and that just is not right. We need to figure out a permanent sleeping situation. The unspoken subject had been hanging in the air between them since their wedding day. I had kept on sleeping on the floor, thinking it was the right thing to do, but Margaret was correct. It was not going to work forever. What do you have in mind? He asked her. The bed is plenty big for 2 people, she said plainly. We are married and we live here together. Sharing it is just a practical matter. She looked right at him. Unless you are not all right with it? No, if you are comfortable, I am too. Then from tonight on, we share the bed. But Caleb, she stopped for a moment. This is only about a place to sleep. Nothing else. Not right now. I need you to know that. I know, and I agree with those terms. That night they laid beside each other in the quiet dark, careful to keep a space between them. Caleb stared up at the ceiling, listening to Margaret's breathing slow down as she fell asleep. He realized this strange marriage of theirs was changing into something he had not expected. It was not love, but it was turning into a true partnership. He did not know if it would ever be more, but for now, this was enough. Two people were learning to trust, building a life together, and honoring a promise made in a storm. Spring hit Wyoming hard and fast, turning the brown land green with new life. The cattle got fat on the fresh grass, and the ranch work became more intense. Caleb worked longer and harder, leaving before the sun came up and coming home long after it set. Margaret saw it. She never complained, but she always kept his supper warm for him on the stove. Her own days had gotten longer, too. With Miss Pritchard retired, Margaret was the only teacher in town, and she now did most of the sewing jobs by herself. They were building a real life together without even noticing. They made coffee just the way the other one liked it. They left books open for the other to see. These small kindnesses were adding up to a feeling of home. One Saturday evening, Caleb rode home and found Margaret standing in the doorway looking deeply troubled. "What is wrong?" he asked, getting off his horse quickly. "There is a problem in town. Mrs. Henderson wanted me to tell you as soon as you got back." Margaret's hands twisted in her apron. "It is about the Willis family." Caleb knew of them. Jim Willis did odd jobs on ranches when he was sober enough, and his wife Ann washed clothes for the richer families. They had 4 children in a tiny shack that was falling apart. "What about them?" "Jim was arrested 2 days ago for being drunk and fighting. He will be in jail for a month, maybe longer. Ann is trying to hold everything together, but she cannot do the washing, care for the children, and put food on the table all at once." Margaret looked straight at him. "The oldest girl, Emma, is 10 years old. She had to stop coming to school 3 weeks ago to help with the younger kids. That is a hard situation, but what can I do? I want to bring Emma here." The words rushed out of her. "Not to live, just during the day while her mother works. Emma could help me with small chores, and I could teach her the lessons she is missing." Caleb looked at his wife's face. Her scars seemed more noticeable when she was upset. "You have thought this through." "I have been thinking about it since she quit school. She is a very bright girl, Caleb. Really bright. But she will lose her chance if she just raises her siblings instead of learning." Margaret's voice sounded desperate. "I know I should have talked to you first, but—" "Yes." Caleb cut her off. Margaret blinked at him, surprised. "Yes. Bring her here. We should help that family if we can." He walked past her and began taking off his work gloves. "When will she start?" "Monday, if you agree. I told Mrs. Henderson I had to ask you first." Margaret followed him inside, and her voice was full of relief. "Thank you. I know this is a big thing to ask. It is nothing I am not willing to give," Caleb said. He hung up his hat and faced her. "You care about that little girl. That is what is important." Something in Margaret's face changed, a mix of softness and surprise, like she did not expect him to understand so easily. "She reminds me of me at her age. Smart, but trapped by family problems and being poor. Then we help her. It is as simple as that." Emma Willis came on Monday morning. She was a thin child with tired eyes, wearing a dress that was more patches than fabric. She stood in the doorway, looking like she might run away at any second. "Come on in, Emma," Margaret said in a soft voice. "This is my husband, Mr. Rowan. He knows you will be helping here during the day." Emma looked at Caleb with fear in her eyes. He figured that in her life, men were usually a source of trouble. He tried to seem small and not scary, and he spoke quietly. "Morning, Emma. Does your mama know you are here?" "Yes, sir." The girl's voice was just a whisper. "Good. Mrs. Rowan says you are a good student, is that right?" "I like to learn, sir, when I get the chance." "Well, you will get plenty of chances here." Caleb finished his coffee and stood up, moving slowly so he would not frighten her. "I have to get to work. You listen to Mrs. Rowan and help her with what she needs. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." Margaret walked him to the door. "Thank you," she said under her breath, "for knowing why this is so important." You have a good heart, Margaret. I am learning that about you. In the weeks that followed, Emma became a regular part of their home. She worked with Margaret, and Margaret taught her reading and numbers. The child was hungry to learn. Caleb watched his wife change when she was with Emma. Margaret had always been strong, but with the girl, she became softer and more patient. One evening, Caleb got home and found them at the table. Margaret's hand was on top of Emma's, and the little girl was crying without a sound. When Margaret looked up, Caleb saw a cold, controlled anger in her eyes. "What happened?" he asked. "Emma's father came home today, drunk. He hit Anne and told Emma she could not come here anymore. He needs her at home." Margaret's voice was level, but her hand was shaking just a little bit. "Anne sent her over anyway. She said she would handle Jim, but Emma is scared he will hurt her mother for it." Anger started to burn inside Caleb. He knew Jim Willis was a drunk, but he did not know he was violent with his family. Where is he now? Probably at the saloon, drinking up the money Anne earned. Caleb took his hat from the hook. "I will be back." "Caleb." Margaret started to get up. "Stay with Emma. I'm just going to have a talk with him." He found Jim Willis right where he expected at the saloon, 3 drinks in and getting louder. Willis was a big man who had gone soft. He looked up with blurry eyes as Caleb came over. "Rowan, did not expect to see you here." "I am not here to drink," Caleb said, keeping his voice low. "I am here to talk about Emma. That girl's schooling is my business now." Caleb's voice was low, cutting through the saloon's noise. "I heard you told Anne that Emma can't come over anymore." Jim Willis sneered back. "You heard right. She has chores at home, not time for filling her head with useless books." Caleb stepped closer, his shadow falling over the drunkard's table. "That education is the only thing that will give her a life better than this. You are keeping that girl trapped in the same hole you dug for yourself." Willis's face turned ugly. "Who are you to tell me how to raise my child? You do not have any of your own." "I understand a father is meant to protect his children, not work them like mules while he drinks his pay." Caleb's hands were tight fists at his sides. "And if you ever harm Anne or those children again, you will answer directly to me. That is a promise. Emma will get her education. You can either help your family or stand in their way, but that girl is getting her chance." Willis started to get up, but Jake Wilson put a heavy hand on his shoulder. "You best listen, Jim. Caleb Rowan always keeps his promises, the good ones and the bad." Willis stared from Caleb to Jake, then slumped back down, defeated. "Fine. She can have her books. Do not blame me when she gets ideas too big for her own good." Caleb turned and walked out, leaving the man to his bottle. Back at the cabin, Emma sat beside Margaret, her small face streaked with old tears. She looked up at Caleb with a fragile hope that tugged at his heart. "Your father and I had a talk," Caleb said gently. "He has agreed to let you continue your schooling. Your mother already gave her blessing." Emma's voice was a small whisper. "Are you sure? He will not be mad at Ma?" "I am sure. And he knows if he causes any trouble, he will have to deal with me." Caleb knelt to look her in the eye. "You are a smart girl, Emma. You have a bright future. Do not let anyone, not even your father, tell you otherwise." After Emma had gone, Margaret looked at Caleb with a curious expression. "What did you say to him?" "Just that Emma deserves a chance, and he needed to stop holding his own family back." "It was more than that," she said. "Emma claimed you looked ready to fight him." "I was, if it came to that. He is a man who hurts his own family. Men like him need to learn that their actions have consequences." Caleb looked directly at Margaret. "I meant every word I wrote in my letter. I will not raise a hand to you, and I will not stand by while others do." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she stepped forward and did something that stunned him. She reached up and laid her scarred hand against his cheek. "Thomas chose the right man to keep his promise," she said, her voice soft. "You are a good man, Caleb." The touch was brief, but it felt like a brand on his skin. That night, lying in the dark, the space between them felt different. Margaret spoke into the quiet. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Why were you so set on never marrying before Thomas asked you to marry me? What made you want to be alone?" Caleb stared at the dark ceiling. It was time for the truth. She deserved that much. My parents, he said, his voice quiet. They had to get married. My mother was expecting me. Neither of them wanted it, but they did what was expected. They spent the next 20 years making each other's lives a living hell. My father drank to escape, and my mother grew bitter over the life she lost. I watched them tear each other apart. I saw how marriage could trap two people and turn them into enemies. I swore I would never let that happen to me. Not unless I was certain it could be different. I was never certain, so I stayed alone, until Thomas made his request. I said yes because I owed him, but I was also terrified. He turned his head to look at her in the shadows. I was scared I would become my father, scared I would make you as unhappy as my mother was. Margaret was silent for a beat. Are you still scared? Sometimes, he admitted, but not as much. He found her hand in the dark and laced his fingers with hers. You are not what I expected, Margaret. You are stronger and kinder than anyone I have ever known. Being your husband does not feel like a trap. It feels like a partnership, she finished for him. Yes, but it is more than that, something I never knew I was missing. Her fingers tightened around his. I feel it too. When I first arrived, I planned to keep my distance. I thought it would be safer that way. She moved a little closer, their shoulders touching. But you make that impossible. You show kindness when I expect harshness, and you protect a child that is not even yours. You respect a wife you never chose. That is not just duty, Caleb. That is who you are. They lay there in the quiet dark, holding hands. Caleb's heart was pounding. He realized he wanted this marriage to be real in every way. Margaret, he said quietly, I need to tell you something. When I married you, it was to keep my word to Thomas. But if I were choosing today, knowing the person you are, I would still choose you. I would choose you not out of duty, but because I want to. He felt her breath catch. What are you saying? I am saying this started as a promise to a friend, but now it is what I want for myself. You are my wife, Margaret, and I would like if you are willing for this to be a true marriage. I want this to be more than just a partnership. She asked him what he meant, her voice careful. He said, like folks who choose each other because they want to build a life together. Caleb turned to her in the dark room. I am not a man who knows about romance. But I can promise you my loyalty and a love built from respect. If that is enough, then that is what I am offering you. After a long silence, she finally spoke, her voice full of emotion. I came out here just to survive, not expecting to be happy. I hoped for a partner, but never affection. Her hand found his face. You gave me all of that, and something I did not even know I needed. You see all my scars and rough edges, but you value me anyway. That is more than enough, Caleb. That is everything. Then he truly kissed her, and she kissed him back with a matching fire. It was a release of everything they had been holding back for months. After they lay close together in the quiet dark, as she was about to fall asleep, she whispered words that grabbed hold of his heart. I choose you too, Caleb, not because of some promise, but because of the man you are. He held her tight, thinking about how a promise made to a dying friend had become so much more. He had married Margaret out of duty, but now he could not picture a single day without her. The next morning, a soft rain was falling, the kind that makes the whole world green. Caleb woke to see Margaret standing by the window. When she turned to him, her face was open in a way he had never seen before. Morning, she said softly. He went to her side and wrapped his arms around her. They stood together, just watching the rain change the land. What are you thinking about? He asked. Just how strange life is. 6 months ago, I was in a factory planning to marry a man I had never met. Now, I am in Wyoming with a husband I have chosen, in a place that feels like home. She turned in his arms. I am so grateful that Thomas asked you to keep his promise, and that you are the kind of man who does. I am grateful too, Caleb said before kissing her. I love you, Margaret. I should have said it last night. Tears welled in her eyes. I love you too. I am staying because I want to. The life we are building is better than I ever imagined." As the rain fell, two strangers who had become partners realized they were building a real love, turning a duty into a shared life. The rain continued all morning, turning the roads into mud. Caleb sent word to the ranch that he was not coming in. It was the first day he had willingly missed in 15 years. His boss, Samuel Garrett, sent a note back that made Caleb smile. It said, "About time you took a day for your wife." While Margaret taught Emma their lessons, Caleb fixed things around the cabin. He could hear her patient voice and knew the girl was truly learning. Around noon, Ann Willis arrived at the door, soaked from the rain. She took in the sight of her daughter learning, Margaret cooking, and Caleb working. "I came to thank you both," Ann said, her voice heavy with emotion, "for what you did for Jim, and for this chance you have given Emma." "Emma earned this herself," Margaret said, handing her a towel. "She is one of the smartest pupils I have ever had." "I just want her to have choices in life," Anne said with a mix of pride and old sadness. "Choices I never had." "She will," Caleb said. "If she keeps this up, she will be ready for a teaching college in a few years." Anne's eyes went wide. "I could never afford that." "We will figure that out when the time comes," Margaret said gently. After Anne and Emma left, Margaret looked at Caleb with a determined fire in her eyes. "We should help her pay for college." He set down his tools. "I was thinking the same thing. We can start putting a little money aside each month. You would do that? For someone else's child?" Caleb took her hand. "She is not just someone else's child. She is part of our life now. And helping her is the best way to honor Thomas. He always believed in helping people build better lives." Tears filled Margaret's eyes. "I do wish I could have met him." "He would have liked you," Caleb said, pulling her close. "He respected people who were honest and strong. I think he would be mighty glad about us." He would be glad his promise turned into something real. They held each other in the quiet cabin while the rain drummed on the roof. They were building a life that was not just for them, but for their community. In the weeks that came after, things began to change. Caleb started thinking about the future in a new way. He and Margaret talked about making the cabin bigger, or maybe even buying their own land. His boss, Samuel Garrett, noticed the change in him. One afternoon, he poured them both a whiskey. "You are a different man since you got married," Garrett said. "You seem more settled, like you have something to work for beyond a paycheck." "Margaret has given me a lot to think about," Caleb said, sipping his drink, "about what I really want out of life." "Good," Garrett told him. "A man needs more than just his work." Then his face turned serious. "I am getting old, Caleb. I have been thinking about what happens to this ranch after I'm gone." Caleb felt a change in the air. "Sir? I do not have any children nor any family that wants to run a cattle ranch in Wyoming, but I do have a foreman who has run this place better than I ever could." Garrett looked Caleb straight in the eye. "I am offering you a partnership. You buy into the ranch now, say for 30%. When I pass on, the rest becomes yours. We can work out the payments from your earnings." The offer was staggering. Ownership. The chance to build something that would last. "That is more than generous, sir. It is practical. You have earned it, and I need to know this place will be in good hands." Garrett poured them another drink. "You should talk it over with your wife. If you both agree, we will have the papers drawn up next week." Caleb rode home with his mind racing. A partnership meant security. It meant he could give Margaret more than a small cabin. He could offer her a real home, a share in the land they were building their life on. Margaret was in the doorway when he rode up, a small smile on her face. "You look like a man who has good news. Samuel Garrett offered me a partnership in the ranch," he said. 30% now, and the rest when he is gone." Caleb swung down from his horse and pulled her into a hug. He just needed to feel that she was real while he wrapped his mind around the news. "This is a chance to own a piece of something, Margaret. To build a real future for us." "Then we take it," she said, just like that. She did not need to talk it over or weigh the risks. "This is what you have worked for your entire life. Of course we take it. It means money will be tight for a good while. Most of what I earn will go to buying my share. We will make do. We have both gotten by on less." Margaret pulled back to look him square in the eye. "This is for us, Caleb. Our chance to build something that will last. I am not about to let a little hardship scare us away from that." The next week, they signed the papers with the town lawyer, making sure it was all legal and official. Caleb signed his name and felt the weight of it all. He was not just the foreman anymore. He was part owner of the Broken Creek Ranch, with a clear path to owning it all one day. This would secure a future for him and for Margaret. The town took notice of the change. Some were happy for them. Others started whispering about the mail-order bride with the scars who had landed on her feet a little too quickly for their liking. Margaret heard the talk, but she let it roll right off her back. She had a life to build. What other people thought was their own business. Summer arrived with long, hot days full of hard work. Margaret took over the schoolhouse for good when Miss Pritchard moved back east to be with her sister. She also grew her sewing business, taking on 3 local girls who needed to learn a trade. Emma Willis was thriving. By the middle of summer, she was reading books from their own shelves. Her father was not drinking nearly as much, though Anne told Margaret she worried he might slip back into his old ways. Then one July evening, Margaret came home from town holding a letter, with tears streaming down her cheeks. Caleb dropped the post he was carrying and ran to her. "What is it? What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Just read this." The letter was from a woman in Philadelphia named Annie Reynolds. She was the girl Margaret had pulled from the textile mill fire all those years ago. Caleb's eyes flew across the words. Annie had written to say she had named her newborn baby girl Margaret Ann. She named her after the woman who had saved her life and given her a chance to have a family of her own. Tucked inside was a small photograph of Annie holding her baby. Both of them were healthy and smiling. "She remembered," Margaret whispered, holding the letter to her chest. "After all this time, she still remembered me." "She really remembers," Margaret whispered, her voice thick with emotion as Caleb held her close. He could feel the tremors running through her, a rare sight for a woman who held her feelings in so tightly. "Of course she does. You gave her a new life, darling. Some kindnesses are never forgotten." He gently kissed her hair. "You saved that girl, Margaret. Now she's honoring you by giving your name to her own daughter. That right there is a legacy." They stood together in the fading light, holding on as Margaret finally let herself cry, not just for joy, but for the memory of all she had overcome. That August, a real test of their partnership, blew in like a dust storm. A neighboring ranch decided they owned the rights to a stream on Broken Creek land and threatened to sue if Samuel Garrett didn't back down. The legal fight could have bled them dry and destroyed everything. Margaret went to the town meeting about it, the only woman there besides the clerk. She listened quietly as the men argued, then she stood up and asked to speak. The room went dead silent. "I have looked over the old territorial land grants," Margaret said, her voice ringing clear and steady. "The water rights were given to Broken Creek Ranch back in 1867. The claim against us comes from a simple misreading of the boundaries." She laid out the papers she got from the territorial office, her finger tracing the words that proved her point. "If you take this to court, you will lose. Worse than that, you will set a powerful example that anyone's rights can be challenged. That does nobody any good." The other lawyer tried to argue, but Margaret's logic was like solid rock. The documents were undeniable. By the time the meeting was over, the neighbors had dropped their claim. Men who had once dismissed her were looking at her with newfound respect. Caleb was waiting outside, pride shining on his face. "You just saved us a fortune." Margaret smiled, pleased with herself. It felt good to use my schooling for something besides teaching children their numbers. You are a remarkable woman. I am just practical, Caleb. No, he said, taking her hand as they walked home. You see a problem and you fix it. You stand up for what is right. That is more than practical. That is remarkable. Margaret squeezed his hand tightly. You see me clearer than anyone ever has. As summer turned to fall, their life together became something deeper than either had expected. The ranch work was hard, but they faced it as a team. The small cabin was now a home, filled with books and laughter. Emma Willis was thriving, helping Margaret teach the younger children. Her mother, Anne, had found a good job as a housekeeper for a wealthy family, earning steady wages and respect. Even Jim Willis was staying sober more often than not. One evening in October, Margaret and Caleb sat on the new porch they had built. She had been quiet all day, and Caleb knew something was on her mind. "What are you thinking about?" he finally asked. She took a long breath before answering. "I was thinking about Thomas, and how his last wish brought us together. I should be sad I never met him, but all I feel is grateful." She turned to him, her eyes serious. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if he had lived?" "Sometimes," Caleb admitted. "But Thomas saw the good in you through your letters, and he knew me well enough to know I would honor my word to marry you and treat you right. He was not wrong about us." "No, he was not," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I think he knew exactly what he was doing. He was giving us both a chance we would not have found on our own." "Maybe," Caleb said, wrapping an arm around her. "Or maybe he just trusted two practical people to build something real out of a tough situation. Either way, I am grateful." They sat in the comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the vast Wyoming sky. They had started as strangers, bound by a promise. Now they were partners and friends who had built a life worth living from the ashes of sorrow. Winter came early that year, and with it came their first child. As Caleb held his newborn daughter, he felt something open up inside him, a love so strong it was almost painful. Caleb stood at the window watching the snow fall, same as it did a year ago when he knelt by his dying friend. That day, Thomas made him promise to find a woman named Margaret and give her the life he could not. That one promise changed everything. It was an impossible ask, taking on a stranger out of duty, but some promises you just have to keep. Now Margaret stood beside him, knowing exactly where his thoughts were. He turned to her and said, "I want to do something to honor him proper, something that shows what his last wish gave to us." He told her about an old pocket watch of Thomas's, a gift from his father. "I aim to give it to Emma when she finishes her schooling. A reminder that one person's faith can change a whole world." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "He would have liked that," she whispered, "knowing his legacy brought us together." And what a legacy it was. Thomas was gone, but the good he put into the world kept on growing. When spring finally pushed through the snow, the ranch was doing better than ever. Margaret was known far and wide as a fine teacher and seamstress, and young Emma Willis, now 12 years old, was reading books Caleb could barely understand. The girl who arrived so thin and weary was now full of dreams about college and writing. One warm afternoon, Caleb came home to find Margaret standing in the garden they had planted together. She had her hands placed on her belly and a strange, wondrous look on her face. "Margaret, what is it?" he asked, his heart starting to pound. She turned to him, her dark eyes shining with a light he had never seen before. "Nothing is wrong, Caleb. For the first time, everything is right." She took his hand and placed it right on her stomach. "I am pregnant. We are going to have a child." The news was a revelation. A child. Theirs. A life grown not just from a promise, but from a love they had built piece by piece. "Are you sure?" he breathed. "I am. I have known for a few weeks, but I wanted to be certain before telling you." Her voice trembled a little. "I know we never planned on this." Caleb stopped her words with a kiss. "This does not change our plans," he said gently. "This fulfills them. You saved a girl from a burning building and traveled 3,000 miles to marry a stranger. You are the bravest person I know. We can do this, together." The summer passed in a happy haze. Margaret taught her advanced students from home while Caleb found himself thinking about his own father, a man who had resented him from the day he was born. He was determined to be a different kind of man, a father who saw his child as a gift, not a burden. One evening, as the baby kicked beneath Margaret's dress, Caleb knew it was time. He finally brought out the box of Thomas's things, which had sat unopened since the funeral. Inside were letters, the watch he was saving for Emma, and a small journal, and at the very bottom he found a surprise, a letter addressed to him in Thomas's clear handwriting. The outside of the letter read, "To be opened after my death." With shaking hands, Caleb read the words from his friend. "Caleb, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you have kept your promise to Margaret. I knew you would. You have never broken your word. I need you to know that asking you to marry her was not just about giving her a safe place to land. It was about giving you both a chance. You have been alone for 15 years, Caleb, hiding from the hurt your parents caused. And Margaret has spent her whole life just surviving. I reckon that maybe, just maybe, you two could help each other heal. Maybe you could build something real. If I was wrong, I am sorry. But I do not think I was wrong. Take care of her, my friend, and take care of yourself. Always, Thomas." The letter blurred as Caleb read it a third time. Thomas had known. He had seen the good they could be for each other. He had not just saved Margaret. He had saved them both. When Margaret came in, he gave her the letter. Her own tears fell as she read it. "He gave us a gift," she said softly, taking his hand. "He trusted us to find our way to each other." She placed his hand on her belly, where their child was moving. "He is part of this baby, part of Emma's future, part of everything we have become." Their daughter was born on a crisp October morning, her cry filling their small home with new life. Caleb looked at his wife and child, a family born from a dying man's promise, and felt a peace he had never known. The promise had not just been kept, it had bloomed into a miracle. "What should we name her?" Margaret asked, her face glowing. Caleb had known for months. "Let's call her Hope, because that is what she is. Hope that the future can be better than the past. Hope that promises kept can lead to joy." "Hope," Margaret whispered with a teary smile. "I like that." There they sat, a new family born from a promise made in a blizzard, now held together by a love they had chosen for themselves. The years that followed were full and busy. The ranch grew and prospered under their shared guidance. Margaret's little school expanded, serving children from all around. Emma Willis went off to college and returned 5 years later to open her own school for girls from poor families. Ann Willis remarried a kind carpenter after Jim passed away. At the wedding, she thanked Margaret and Caleb again. "Emma is everything I ever hoped she would be," Ann said, "and it is all because you believed in her." Samuel Garrett passed away peacefully 7 years later, leaving the entire ranch to Caleb, just as he had promised. Caleb and Margaret ran it together, building a legacy for the future. They had more children, 2 sons and another daughter, all raised to understand that respect and honesty were the foundations of a good life. On their 10th anniversary, Caleb and Margaret stood on the very spot where he had first brought her home. The cabin was now a large house, filled with their family. The land around them was a testament to their hard work and partnership. They had started with a promise made to a dying man, and from it they had built a life filled with a love that was stronger than they could have ever imagined. Imagine being asked to marry a complete stranger, all because of a promise to a dying friend. That was Caleb's burden and Margaret's gamble. They were true underdogs, starting with nothing but an obligation. This story shows how the hardest promises can build the most beautiful lives. Caleb pulled Margaret close as they surveyed their land. They had built it all together, from the pastures to the fences running straight and true. He looked at her scarred face, the most beautiful he had ever known, and asked, "Do you ever regret it?" She shook her head. "Not for 1 second. Coming here was the bravest thing I ever did. Marrying you was the smartest." He gently kissed her forehead. "Everything good in my life came from your courage." Later, Caleb held the pocket watch that had belonged to Thomas. It had been a decade since his friend's final wish started everything. The watch felt heavy, a reminder of a promise made in a fierce Wyoming storm. Thomas had been gone a decade, but his presence was everywhere. His last wish had grown into a thriving ranch, a loving family, and a school for the community. Margaret stood beside Caleb, knowing exactly what he was thinking. "He would be so proud," she said softly. "I hope he knows what became of his promise," Caleb replied. "I think he does. A promise like that grows bigger than the words spoken." She took the watch from his hand and set it near their family pictures. Here was the heart of it all. "Thomas asked you to give me a future, but you gave us one together." Her eyes shined. "That is not just keeping a promise. That is honoring it." They stood in the quiet home they had built from a simple obligation. They had started as strangers, but now they were thankful for the storm that pushed them together and the love that grew against all odds. And so, Caleb kept his word to his dying friend, but he did so much more. He took that impossible request and made something precious from it. He and Margaret built a life on respect and hard work, creating a love that grew from a shared purpose. On cold winter nights with the snow falling outside, Caleb would stand with Margaret and think about promises. He realized the best ones are not just kept, but are surpassed. Their story was the proof. An obligation had turned into devotion. Two complete strangers had become soulmates. A desperate plea had become a life full of celebration. The promise was complete. The life was built. And the love that started as a simple duty was now a joy they could not live without. They had chosen each other every single day, and that made all the difference. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.